A stranger saved my life that night, and I didn't even know I was in danger until he handed me his phone. I was sitting in the back of a police car at 1 in the morning, wrapped in a thin shock blanket that did nothing to stop my shaking. Through the window, I watched 2 officers force 2 men face down onto the cold pavement, pulling their wrists behind their backs and clicking handcuffs into place. My Uber driver was standing a few feet away, giving his statement to a detective, his hands still trembling even as he spoke. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing back at me like he needed to make sure I was still there, still breathing, still alive. Because 10 minutes earlier, I almost wasn't. I had ordered a routine rideshare home from my best friend's birthday party, expecting nothing more than a quiet drive and a warm bed. Instead, I ended up in the middle of something that still gives me nightmares. 2 men had been following me since I left the bar. They watched me say goodbye to my friends. They watched me check my phone on the sidewalk. They watched me get into a car alone. And they followed. If my driver hadn't noticed what I completely missed, if he hadn't done exactly what he did in exactly the right way, I don't know if I would be here to tell this story. I need to take you back to before that night, so you understand how ordinary everything was supposed to be. My name is Jenna, and at 24 years old, I was living the kind of quiet, predictable life that I thought would keep me safe. I worked as a dental hygienist at a family practice in Columbus, Ohio, cleaning teeth and reminding patients to floss while they nodded and immediately forgot everything I said. My apartment was a small 1-bedroom in the University District, a neighborhood I chose specifically because it felt safe. Coffee shops on every corner, bookstores with cats sleeping in the windows, students walking around at all hours, even late at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My routine rarely changed. I woke up early for my morning shifts at the dental office, spent my afternoons at the gym trying to convince myself I enjoyed running on a treadmill, and filled my weekends with brunch dates and movie nights with my small circle of friends. I wasn't the kind of person who went out to clubs or stayed up until 3 a.m. I liked my quiet life. I thought it protected me. My best friend Rosalie was the opposite. We'd known each other since freshman year of college, when we got randomly assigned as roommates and somehow didn't kill each other. She was loud, confident, and absolutely fearless in a way I both admired and worried about. She was always the one pushing our friend group to try new restaurants, take spontaneous road trips, stay out just 1 more hour. Her birthday was that Saturday, and she'd spent weeks planning a dinner, followed by drinks at a bar downtown called the Penny Tap. Nothing too wild, she promised. Just good food, good friends, and maybe a few too many cocktails. My older sister Danielle lived in Chicago with her husband, but you'd think she was right next door with how often she checked in on me. She was the protective one in our family, always had been. Every time I went out at night, she'd text me to share my location. Every time I got home, she expected a message confirming I was safe. I used to roll my eyes at her constant worrying, but I always did what she asked because it made her feel better, and honestly, it made me feel a little safer too. Knowing someone was always watching out for me, even from 4 hours away. I considered myself cautious. I didn't walk alone at night if I could help it. I held my keys between my fingers when I crossed parking lots. I always checked the license plate and driver photo before getting into any rideshare. All the little things women are taught to do from the time we're old enough to understand why we need to do them. I thought I was careful enough. I thought following the rules would keep me out of danger. I never imagined that danger would come looking for me anyway. The night of Rosalie's birthday started exactly as planned. 8 of us crowded around a long table at an Italian restaurant, passing bread baskets and arguing over which pasta to order. Rosalie sat at the head of the table wearing a plastic tiara her boyfriend had bought as a joke, laughing so hard at one point that wine nearly came out of her nose. I remember thinking how good it felt to be surrounded by people I loved, celebrating something as simple as another year of friendship. After dinner, we walked to the Penny Tap around 10 o'clock. The bar was crowded, but not overwhelming, filled with the usual Saturday night mix of college kids and young professionals. I found a spot at a high-top table near the back and nursed 2 drinks over the course of 3 hours, pacing myself because I had an early shift the next morning and couldn't afford to be hungover. By midnight, My feet hurt from standing in heels, and my eyes were getting heavy. I hugged Rosalie goodbye, told her I loved her, and pulled out my phone to order an Uber. The app said my driver was 3 minutes away. Silver Honda Civic, driver named Marcus. I stepped outside to wait on the sidewalk, wrapping my jacket tighter against the cool night air. The street was still busy with weekend crowds, people smoking and laughing and waiting for their own rides. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. And that's when I noticed them. Subscribe for more stories and tell me where you're watching from. 2 men were standing near the corner about 20 feet from where I waited. They weren't doing anything obviously wrong. Just 2 guys in casual clothes, talking to each other, glancing at their phones. But something about the way one of them kept looking in my direction made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He was wearing a gray hoodie with the hood pulled up even though it wasn't that cold. Every few seconds, his eyes would drift toward me, then back to his friend, then back to me again. I told myself I was being paranoid. Downtown Columbus on a Saturday night was packed with people. They were probably just waiting for their own ride. Maybe one of them thought I looked familiar. Maybe I was being self-centered, assuming anyone was paying attention to me at all. I unlocked my phone and pretended to scroll through something, keeping my head down while I waited for my Uber to arrive. The silver Civic pulled up to the curb and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I checked the license plate against my app. It matched. I looked at the driver through the window. Black man, late 40s, graying hair at his temples. He matched the photo too. I opened the back door and slid inside. "Jenna?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "That's me. Thanks for picking me up." He nodded and pulled away from the curb. His name was Marcus, according to the app. He had a 4.97 rating and over 3,000 trips completed. The kind of driver you don't think twice about trusting. I settled into my seat and let out a breath, happy to be off my feet and on my way home. I watched the downtown lights pass by through the window, already thinking about taking off my shoes and climbing into bed. The bar noise faded behind us as Marcus turned onto a quieter street. That's when I noticed something was wrong. Marcus kept checking his mirrors. Not the quick, casual glances drivers normally do when changing lanes or watching traffic. These were long, deliberate looks. His eyes would fix on the rearview mirror for several seconds, then shift to the side mirror, then back to the road. His jaw was tight. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles looked strained. I leaned forward slightly. "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us for what felt like forever. Then he spoke, and his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "Don't turn around. There's a black SUV that's been behind us since I picked you up. They pulled out right after you got in my car." My stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster that had just tipped over the edge. I wanted to whip around and look through the back window, but something in his tone made me freeze. I kept my eyes forward, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Maybe they're just going the same direction." He shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off the road. "I've been driving rideshare for 6 years. I know when someone's following. Those 2 men were standing on the corner watching you before you got in. One of them was wearing a gray hoodie. Soon as you got in my car, they got in that SUV. The man in the gray hoodie, the one I'd noticed staring at me, the one I'd convinced myself I was imagining things about." Marcus made a turn that wasn't on my route. I watched the GPS on his phone recalculate, showing a new path. I held my breath, waiting, praying that when I looked in the side mirror, the street behind us would be empty. It wasn't. The black SUV made the same turn, staying about 3 car lengths back. Marcus made another turn. The SUV followed. My hands were shaking now. I pressed them flat against my thighs to try to stop the trembling. This couldn't be happening. Things like this happened in movies, in news stories, to other people, not to me. Not on a random Saturday night after my best friend's birthday party. Marcus looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were calm but deadly serious, the kind of calm that comes from someone who has already decided what they're going to do. "I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm going to hand you my phone. There's a number saved under the name Marie. That's my wife. I need you to call her and tell her you're safe. Tell her you're with me, and we're heading to the Sunoco station on 5th Street. She'll know what that means." I didn't understand. "Why am I calling your wife?" He handed his phone back to me without looking away from the road. "Because if something happens to this car, she'll have a record of the call. She'll call 911 with our exact location. But I need you to do something else. When you're on the phone with her, I need you to pretend you know me. Talk like I'm your uncle picking you up from a party. If those men are listening somehow, or if they're watching through the windows, I want them to think this wasn't a random rideshare. I want them to think someone knows exactly where you are and exactly who you're with." My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold his phone. The screen was cracked in one corner and the case was worn from years of use. But right then, it felt like the most important object in the world. I understood what Marcus was doing. He was creating witnesses. He was building a trail of evidence. He was making sure that if something terrible happened in the next few minutes, someone would know where we were and who was responsible. He was thinking 3 steps ahead while I could barely remember how to breathe. I found the contact labeled Marie and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a woman's voice answered, warm but instantly alert, like she was used to getting calls at strange hours. "Marcus? What's going on?" I swallowed hard and tried to keep my voice steady. It came out higher than normal, shaky around the edges, but I pushed through. "Hi, Auntie Marie. It's Jenna. I just wanted to let you know Uncle Marcus picked me up from Rosalie's party and we're on our way to that gas station on 5th Street. I should be home soon." There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a heartbeat of silence. Then Marie's voice changed completely. The warmth was still there, but underneath it was something harder, focused. Like a switch had flipped and she knew exactly what was happening, without anyone having to explain. "I understand, sweetheart. I'm going to stay on the line with you, okay? You just keep talking to me like everything's normal. Tell me about the party. How was Rosalie's birthday?" So I did. I talked about the Italian restaurant and how we'd ordered too much garlic bread. I talked about the plastic tiara Rosalie wore and how she'd almost spit wine across the table laughing at a joke I couldn't even remember now. I talked about the crowded bar and the overpriced cocktails and how my feet were killing me from wearing heels all night. I talked about nothing and everything, filling the silence with meaningless details while my heart slammed against my ribs and my eyes stayed locked on the side mirror. The black SUV was still there, 3 car lengths back, following every turn. Marcus drove with absolute focus, his movements smooth and deliberate. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't making sudden turns or doing anything that might provoke the men behind us. He was just steadily, carefully navigating us toward safety. Every few seconds, he would glance at the mirror, confirm the SUV was still following, and adjust his route slightly. I had no idea where we were anymore. The streets all looked the same in the dark, unfamiliar neighborhoods I'd never driven through before. Marie kept me talking. Every time I faltered or ran out of things to say, she would ask another question. What was I wearing tonight? Did I take any pictures? What did Rosalie think of her birthday present? Her voice was an anchor, steady and calm, pulling me back from the edge of panic every time I started to slip. At one point, I heard her speak to someone else in the background, her voice muffled like she'd covered the phone with her hand. I couldn't make out the words, but when she came back on the line, she sounded even more composed. "You're doing great, Jenna. Marcus knows what he's doing. You just keep talking to me. You're almost there." I didn't know where there was. I didn't know what was going to happen when we got there. All I knew was that a man I'd never met before tonight was risking himself to protect me, and his wife was staying on the phone with a stranger, because that's what good people do when someone needs help. I thought about my sister Danielle back in Chicago. I thought about how many times she'd texted me to share my location, how many times I'd rolled my eyes and told her she worried too much. I wished I had called her before I left the bar. I wished I had told her I loved her. I wished I had done 100 things differently, but it was too late now. Marcus glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "We're about 2 minutes out. When we get to the gas station, I need you to stay in the car. Don't open the door. Don't get out. No matter what, I'm going to handle this." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My throat was too tight to speak. "There's a police cruiser that parks at that station most nights. If it's there, this ends." Quick, if it's not, Marie has already called 911 and they're on their way. Marie's voice came through the phone, soft but firm. The police are dispatched, sweetheart. They know the location. Help is coming. I closed my eyes for just a second and took the deepest breath I could manage. The fear was still there, cold and heavy in my chest, but something else was growing alongside it. Trust. These two strangers, Marcus and Marie, were doing everything in their power to keep me safe. I barely knew them, but in that moment, they felt like family. I opened my eyes and saw the bright lights of the gas station glowing ahead through the windshield, and parked right near the entrance, exactly where Marcus said it might be, was a police cruiser with 2 officers sitting inside. Marcus pulled into the Sunoco station, and I immediately understood why he had chosen this exact spot. The lot was flooded with harsh fluorescent light, the kind that leaves nowhere to hide. Security cameras were mounted on every corner of the building, their little red lights blinking steadily. And right there near the entrance, just like Marcus had hoped, sat a police cruiser with 2 officers inside drinking coffee and looking at their phones. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. Marcus pulled the Civic right up next to the cruiser, so close that my passenger window was only a few feet from the driver's side of the police car. He put the car in park and turned to look at me, his face serious but calm. Stay in the car. Do not open the door. Do not get out for any reason. I'm going to talk to the officers. I nodded, still clutching his phone in my hand. Marie was still on the line. I could hear her breathing, steady and patient, waiting. Marcus got out of the car and walked directly to the officer's window. I watched him gesture with his hands as he spoke, pointing back toward the entrance of the lot. Both officers looked up from their phones, their expressions shifting from bored to alert in a matter of seconds. One of them said something into the radio clipped to his shoulder. That's when I finally let myself look. The black SUV had pulled into the lot behind us. It was stopped near the air pump at the far edge of the station, engine still running, headlights still on. I could see 2 figures in the front seats, but they weren't moving. They were just sitting there, watching. The officers got out of their cruiser. They were both young, maybe early 30s, but they moved with purpose. One of them approached the SUV while the other stayed near Marcus, his hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon. I held my breath so hard my chest ached. Everything happened fast after that. The officer near the SUV motioned for the driver to roll down the window. I saw the driver hesitate, his brake lights flickering like he was thinking about putting the car in reverse. But another car had pulled into the lot behind him, blocking his exit. A regular customer who had no idea they had just become part of something much bigger. The officer's hand moved to his holster. He shouted something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. Then the doors of the SUV opened and 2 men stepped out with their hands raised. One of them was wearing a gray hoodie. I felt all the air leave my body. It was him, the man from the corner, the one who had been watching me outside the bar, the one I had tried to convince myself I was imagining. He was standing there with his hands in the air, his face illuminated by the harsh gas station lights, and I could finally see him clearly. He looked so ordinary, average height, average build, forgettable face, the kind of man you would walk past on the street without a second glance. The officers ordered both men to their knees, then face down on the pavement. I watched them get handcuffed, their arms pulled behind their backs, their faces pressed against the dirty concrete. More sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Within minutes, the lot was filled with flashing lights. Police cars, an unmarked sedan, even an ambulance that someone must have called just in case. Marie's voice came through the phone, gentle and full of relief. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. You're safe." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to feel safe, but my body wouldn't stop shaking. My teeth were chattering even though I wasn't cold. I watched the officers search the SUV, pulling things out of the back seat and placing them in evidence bags. From where I sat, I couldn't tell what they were finding. I found out later. Zip ties, a roll of duct tape, a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade, and a small bottle of liquid that tested positive for chloroform. They hadn't been following me because they were bored. They hadn't been watching me outside the bar because they thought I was pretty. They had been hunting, waiting for the right target, the right moment, the right opportunity. A woman alone, getting into a car at midnight, heading home to an empty apartment. I was supposed to be their prey. And if Marcus hadn't been paying attention, if he hadn't trusted his instincts, if he hadn't known exactly what to do, they would have gotten exactly what they wanted. I spent the next 3 hours at the police station giving my statement. A detective named Officer Reyes sat across from me with a notepad and a recorder, asking me to walk through the night from the very beginning. I told her about dinner with Rosalie. I told her about the 2 men on the corner. I told her about every word Marcus said, every turn he made, every second of that drive that felt like it lasted a lifetime. She wrote everything down and nodded along, but I could tell from the look on her face that she had seen cases like this before. That knowledge made me feel sick. Marcus stayed the whole time. He didn't have to. The police had taken his statement within the first hour and told him he was free to go. But every time I came out of a room or walked down a hallway, he was still there in the waiting area, drinking vending machine coffee and scrolling through his phone. When our eyes met, he would give me a small nod, like he was silently saying he wasn't leaving until he knew I was okay. His wife Marie showed up around 2 in the morning. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked braids pulled back from her face. She walked straight up to me before I could even introduce myself, wrapped her arms around me, and held on tight. She smelled like lavender and fabric softener, and for some reason, that small detail made me start crying all over again. "You're okay now," she said quietly, rubbing my back like I was her own daughter. "You're safe. That's all that matters." The 2 men were identified as suspects in a series of attempted abductions across the Columbus area over the previous 8 months. 3 other women had reported being followed after leaving bars and restaurants downtown, but all of them had managed to get away before anything happened. One had ducked into a busy restaurant. Another had flagged down a passing car. The third had run until she found a group of strangers and begged them to let her stay with them until the men disappeared. I was going to be their 4th attempt. Based on what police found in their SUV, they weren't planning to let me get away. I called Danielle as soon as I got home that morning. The sun was just starting to come up, pale pink light filtering through my apartment windows. My hands were still shaking as I held the phone to my ear. She answered on the first ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Jenna, it's 6 in the morning. What's wrong?" I told her everything. I heard her gasp, then go silent, then start crying so hard she couldn't form words. When she finally caught her breath, the first thing she said was that she was booking a flight. She arrived in Columbus that afternoon and stayed with me for a week, sleeping in my bed, because I couldn't stand to be alone in the dark. I still have nightmares sometimes. I'll be standing on a sidewalk somewhere, waiting for a ride, and I'll see a black SUV pull up behind me. I'll wake up with my heart pounding and my sheets soaked with sweat, reaching for my phone to make sure I'm still in my apartment. I check my locks more than I used to. I look over my shoulder in parking lots. I sit near exits in restaurants. Some part of me will probably always be looking for the man in the gray hoodie, even though I know he's behind bars. But I'm alive, and I'm alive because a stranger named Marcus decided that my safety mattered more than his own convenience. He didn't know me. He had no obligation to help me. He could have dropped me off at my apartment and driven away, completely unaware of what was about to happen. But he paid attention. He trusted his gut. And he put himself between me and 2 men who wanted to do me harm. I wrote him a letter a few weeks after that night, trying to put into words what his actions meant to me. I went through 5 drafts because nothing I wrote felt big enough. When I finally gave it to him, along with a gift card that felt embarrassingly small, he just shook his head and looked at me with tired, kind eyes. "I have 2 daughters," he said. "I just did what I'd want someone to do for them. We still keep in touch. Marie sends me cards on my birthday. I send their daughters presents at Christmas. They became family in a way I never could have predicted." What I learned from that night is something I think about constantly. The world is full of people who want to do harm, who watch and wait for the right moment to strike. But it's also full of people like Marcus, people who pay attention, who trust their instincts, who refuse to look away when something feels wrong. I survived because one good man decided that a stranger's life was worth protecting. If someone ever tells you that something feels wrong, believe them. And if you ever get the chance to be someone's Marcus, take it. You might be the only thing standing between them and the worst night of their life. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.